The latest official count of over 99.99% of ballots in Peru's presidential elections shows progressive candidate Pedro Castillo ahead of right-winger Keiko Fujimori with 50.2% of the votes. They are separated by a difference of about 71 and 400,000 votes. The repression continues in Colombia as the national strike mobilizations reach their 43rd day, while protesters have called on the delegation from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to properly investigate the abuses. The number of children in child labor has risen to 160 million worldwide, an increase of 8.4 million children in the last 4 years, with millions more at risk due to the impacts of COVID-19. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. And now we begin. In Peru, Pedro Castillo has maintained the lead in the presidential runoff polls held last Sunday. According to the latest figures from Peru's electoral authority, the official count of almost 100% of the vote suggests that he has beaten far-right rival Keiko Fujimori by a narrow margin of less than a percentage point. The difference between Castillo and Fujimori now stands at just over 71,000 ballots. On Tuesday evening, Castillo briefly addressed hundreds of supporters who have been gathering on a permanent basis in front of his Free Peru Party headquarters in Lima, awaiting the final results. Meanwhile, the far-right candidate Keiko Fujimori told media at a press conference in Lima that she is requesting 200,000 votes to be annulled. Fujimori, daughter of former dictator Alberto Fujimori, is facing charges of corruption, for which she spent 15 months in prison and was released on bail in May last year. All international observer missions have denied any significant irregularities in the process. Meanwhile, Peru's Congress sessioned this Wednesday to begin debates on 12 constitutional reform bills, in what analysts and political sectors decried as a clear attempt to block an eventual Pedro Castillo administration. As the vote count advances in Peru, the special electoral jury held public hearings on contested votes during the presidential runoff elections of June the 6th. Attached to the National Jury of Elections, the Special Electoral Jury of the District of Lima Centro held 20 public hearings this Wednesday to ratify and resolve appeals regarding challenge ballots of votes from tally sheets verified by the legal representatives of the Free Peru and Popular Force Party. During the hearings, the Special Electoral Jury explained to citizens present the causes for which a tally sheet is verified. These include material errors such as the numbers entered, illegible tally sheets, or incomplete information. These bodies are the first authorities to decide on the observations made on the vote tally sheets sent from the decentralized branches of the Office of Electoral Processes. This Wednesday, the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernández, said he will work with whoever was declared president of Peru for the sake of all Latin America.
Has decided with democracy and with the popular vote how it's going to face its future. I haven't had the opportunity to talk with whoever apparently has been elected, but if that were confirmed today, I would call him. I have all the desire that we work together, all the desire that we join efforts for Latin America.
On Wednesday, the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernández, received Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, as the Spanish government continues to seek to boost relations with South America. Sanchez's government has stated it seeks to strengthen investments in Argentina, particularly in the small and medium-sized enterprise sector. At the end of the meeting with business people from both countries, Sánchez and Fernández committed themselves to strengthening existing bilateral ties. Regarding the COVID-19 situation and access to vaccines, Sánchez insisted that the donation of vaccines should not only reach closer nations, but also areas where the pandemic is hitting hard, such as South America. He also reiterated his support for a waiver on vaccine patents. Sanchez's visit to Argentina comes hot on the heels of Fernandez's stop in Spain last month as part of the European tour seeking support for renegotiations on Argentina's foreign debt. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez called for understanding on referring to a possible pardon for Catalan politicians convicted over a failed 2017 independence bid during his visit to Argentina. Spain's Supreme Court is against the granting of any prompt or pardon, total or partial, to 12 Catalans guilty for their role in the secession referendum and the Declaration of Independence. The court argued Wednesday that it had respected the principle of proportionality in its sentencing and saw no evidence or indication of remorse from the prisoners to justify any such pardon.
I ask for understanding and magnanimity to the whole of Catalan society and the whole of Hispanic society, because I believe that the challenge ahead of us is worth it. The challenge ahead is nothing but showing coexistence to overcome the crisis that we lived through in the past 2017, and consequently, despite the misgivings that the whole of Hispanic society may have, I ask for that, understanding and magnanimity, because without any doubt, the goal is worthwhile.
Leaders of Argentina and Spain also shared their vision for making coronavirus vaccines available worldwide more quickly.
From the multilateral point of view, Argentina and Spain are defending the liberalization of vaccines, that they are considered a public global good and that consequently their distribution is expedited. The production capacity of humanity as a whole is increased to be able to vaccinate all our societies as quickly as possible, and thereby definitely overcome this calamity that COVID-19 represents.
We see with great concern that 90% of the vaccines produced are in the hands of 10% of countries, and we think that's great inequity. Argentina is making an enormous effort on the possibility to start producing the Sputnik V vaccine and advancing with the possibility of producing the Sinopharm vaccine in Argentina.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. Mobilizations continue in Colombia as protesters rallied and marched towards the capital, Bogotá, this Wednesday from different locations for a massive peaceful rally outside the hotel, hosting a delegation from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, which will look into evidence of violations by state security forces. The National Strike Committee was meeting with the Commission's representatives to expose the atrocities committed by police, military forces, and armed gangs against peaceful demonstrators. Over 60 murders have been registered. The collective of trade union, indigenous, rural, students, and cultural organizations, among many other platforms, call on mobilizations to press the government to sign a pre-agreement to guarantee the right to social protest and to ensure progress in negotiations on the strike's demands.
We are gathered here at the Tequendama Hotel, where the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is verifying the demands, the complaints for the persecution, for the murders.
The situation has researched to point that people woke up. Unfortunately, we have a youth who today are fully informed, who don't believe everything they hear.
Today, we are here doing this sit-in to hand over to you, on the part of the National Strike Committee, the memory of these people who have been attacked, and we hope that the international community will also speak out about it.
Meanwhile, Colombian police forces violently repressed protesters of the indigenous collective protest movement known as Minga in the city of Cali. In the framework of the national strike mobilizations that have been ongoing since April 28th, indigenous demonstrators were violently repressed by police forces while they were protesting for the rights to be respected in accordance with the country's constitution. The director of Amnesty International for the Americas, Erika Guevara Rosas, stressed that the attacks suffered by the indigenous Minga are a reflection of the violence and repression that the nation experiences as a whole, as well as the abuse of power by officials, which have left hundreds dead and dozens wounded. She called on the Iván Duque government to take action faced with the crimes that the Colombian people continue to suffer at the hands of the state security forces. Venezuela hosted this Wednesday an international academic video conference on unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States and its allies against countries with independent policies. The event, held worldwide by video conference, invited experts and senior officials from different governments to evaluate the impact of unilateral coercive measures on international law and also the populations suffering from illegal sanctions. The speakers sought to activate mechanisms to counteract these measures and to move forward in the construction of a peaceful and multipolar world. Addressing the conference, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza stressed the precise international regulations on sanctions.
It would be necessary to discuss and establish under which international regulations a state considers itself to have the power, the authority to punish, to sanction other states. We as civilized countries respect the United Nations Convention, and this convention clearly contemplates when and how coercive measures can be adopted, which are never unilateral and have a procedure for their application and evaluation, and are not a political or ideological will of a particular government in a particular country.
The United States continues its pressure on the sovereign government of Nicaragua by announcing new sanctions against 4 advisors to the Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega in response to the arrest of opposition figures accused of acts that undermined the country's independence, sovereignty, and self-determination. The latest individuals to be sanctioned by the U.S. State Department include the President of the Central Bank of Nicaragua, a Brigadier General of the Nicaraguan Army, a member of the Electoral Commission, and the chairwoman of the Creative Economic Commission. The imposition of sanctions in Nicaragua are part of the destabilization project that began with the coup attempt in 2018. This includes an opposition sector that calls for such measures from the U.S. and seeks to create a difficult climate that includes violence, political chaos, and economic boycotts in order to undermine the holding of elections scheduled for November 2021. On Wednesday, U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in the United Kingdom for the first stop of a European tour and the G7 summit, during which he will meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Biden is said to have a one-to-one meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Thursday, as the two seek to shore up the so-called special relationship in the wake of Brexit. The 8-day trip will conclude in Switzerland, where Biden will meet with Putin in the midst of the tensions between Moscow and Kyiv, as well as the ongoing U.S. attacks and sanctions on Russia. Before departing, Biden said the trip will demonstrate the strength of the transatlantic alliance and focus on making clear to Putin on China that Europe and the United States are tied. And now we address other topics. Uruguay began vaccinating young people between the ages of 12 and 17 with doses from Pfizer to become the first Latin American country to inoculate children against COVID-19. About 157,000 children have already registered for vaccination against COVID-19, out of a total population of 280,000 in this age group. Authorities hope to schedule an early return to the classroom from secondary education by the end of July, once the group reaches full immunity. Elementary schools are reopening in June. Chile also authorized the vaccination of adolescents between 12 and 16 years of age with Pfizer, but the campaign will begin after June the 20th.
To get vaccinated for myself and my family, and to be able to resume my activities as soon as possible.
At the moment, it's one of the few measures that we can adopt to reduce infections and protect everyone a little better. We had no other tools.
This Wednesday, France and Belgium further relaxed their COVID-19 restrictions as cases fall and vaccinations rise, giving hope of a return to normal life. With the easing of the curfew in France, people will be able to dine indoors and stay out until 11 p.m. for the first time in months. The new measures also saw gyms reopen their doors to eager fitness fans. According to French authorities, if the situation continues to improve, the overnight curfew will be dropped entirely on June 30th. Likewise, Belgium also relaxed restrictions, allowing cafes and restaurants to serve indoors, while mask-wearing rules were also eased in Brussels. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The number of children in child labor has risen to 160 million worldwide, an increase of 8.4 million in the last 4 years, with millions more at risk due to the impacts of COVID-19, according to a new report by the International Labour Organization and UNICEF. The report points to a significant rise in the number of children aged 5 to 11 years in child labor. The number of children aged 5 to 17 in hazardous work has risen to 79 million since 2016. Hazardous work is work likely to harm health, safety, or morals. The global picture reflects deteriorating economic and social conditions in developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The report also noticed that the previous year's downward trend of child labor in Asia and the Pacific and Latin America and the Caribbean has stalled.
We are losing ground in the fight to end child labor. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the first increase in 2 decades. 8.4 million more children engaged in child labor since 2016. And now, under COVID-19, an additional 9 million children are at risk of being pushed into child labor by the end of next year. They are affected by school closures, lockdowns, lost parental jobs and income, a lack of social safety nets. Families are desperate and they're turning to child labor as a last resort. We must not accept this. We urge countries to expand income support measures like child benefits to get children back into school where they belong, and to invest in programs that prevent and protect them from being exploited. It's time to get back on track.
On Wednesday, a United Nations human rights expert warned of mass death from starvation, disease and exposure in eastern Myanmar after the military forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes in Kaya state. In a statement, Tom Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur for Myanmar, called for urgent international action, stating that the attacks by the military were threatening the lives of many thousands of men, women and children. The plea came hours after the UN office in the country said the violence in Kaya had displaced an estimated 100,000 people who were now seeking safety in forests, host communities and southern parts of neighboring San state. The executive also said that those fleeing and those in locations affected by bombing and the artillery fire were in dire need of food, water, shelter, fuel and access to health care. In Iran, the presidential election campaign is in full steam. A second debate between candidates was held this week. Polls are due on June 18th. The debate took place on Tuesday and was attended by a 7 candidates for the presidency. Socio-cultural and political issues were on focus on the discussion. The need to achieve the lifting of the unilateral and illegal measures imposed on the country by the United States. The candidates also called for improved trade with 15 neighboring countries and progress in building a more inclusive society. Presidential elections are scheduled for June 18th in the Persian nation. China and the United States agreed to keep a fluid dialogue on trade issues. China's Minister of Commerce, Wang Wentao, had a phone talk with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, this week. A Chinese statement said that during the talks, Wang and Raimondo stressed the importance of dialogue and communication between China and the United States in the business field, and agreed to promote the healthy development of pragmatic cooperation on trade and investment, while properly handle differences. The U.S. Senate approved this week a law to promote innovation and competitiveness, with China considered lessive to its sovereignty. President Joe Biden has promised to prevent China to become the world's leading economic power. On Wednesday, heavy monsoon rains lashed India, specifically in the country's largest city, Mumbai. The city has seen heavy rainfall in the last 24 hours, disrupting life in the country's financial capital. Many parts of Mumbai were flooded and some train services cancelled as a result of the rain. According to climate experts, the southwest monsoon arrived 2 days ahead of its scheduled date. India had been hit hard by hurricanes and other storms prior to the arrival of the rains, which have impeded the vaccination process as the country battles the second wave of COVID-19.
It's been raining a lot in Mumbai. Today, the Harbour Railway line has been shut down, though the situation here is a little better. Many places like Sion and Kerala have been heavily waterlogged. The rainwater does not flow out easily from my building. Whenever there are heavy rains or high tide, the rain gets waterlogged everywhere and our houses get flooded.
And the Israeli annexed Golan Heights is part of the Syrian Arab territory. Based on international legitimacy, Syria's foreign ministry stressed on Wednesday, reacting to recent statements by the United States Secretary of State. Anthony Blinken supported Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights since 1967, but stopped short of endorsing the annexation. Syria's foreign ministry said Blinken's statements are part of Washington's continuous support of Israeli aggression against its neighbors, in flagrant violation of international law and the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Syria will continue its legitimate struggle to recover the occupied lands in the Golan, the foreign ministry said. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.